The dust wasn't just dry that day, it clung like shame, coating the hem of Helen Claiborne's skirt as she walked into Dry River with a flour sack slung over her shoulder and a cast-iron skillet tucked beneath her arm like it might guard her heart. Every step pressed her deeper into the eyes of those watching, and those eyes didn't blink kindly. They remembered her. That girl from the other side of the ridge. The rancher's bride with Sunday gloves and eyes too soft for work. They remembered the wedding that smelled like magnolia soap and the husband who rode proud in church but didn't return the next spring. And now she was here again, not on a horse or wagon, but on foot. No jewelry. No husband. Just dust, silence, and a skillet that hadn't seen butter in weeks. She passed the saloon where a man spit without looking her way. Past the post office where the clerk leaned out just enough to whisper to the seamstress beside her. Helen didn't pause. She'd learned what waiting did. Waiting made you soft inside, and softness was a kind of invitation in towns like this. At the feed store, Emmett Bishop was telling a joke about mule dung and sermons when he saw her shadow stretch across the wood floor. He looked up and smiled like a snake stretching. "Well, I'll be," he said, loud enough for the others to hear. "If it ain't the Claiborne widow, unless you got remarried on your way back from disgrace?" Helen didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her eyes steady. "I'm looking for work." Emmett snorted. "Work?" He leaned on the counter like he was about to tell her a bedtime tale. "You mean like real work? 'Cause I don't think we got need for gossip ghosts makin' soup round here." A few men chuckled. One muttered, "Try the Apache." More laughter. Helen let the silence hang. It made them uncomfortable, and that was enough. She turned without a word and stepped outside, where the sky stretched unbroken and uncaring. Miss Lydia May found her that afternoon behind the church, crouched beside the well, hands shaking as she tried to scoop water with her hands. The older woman didn't ask questions, just offered a folded cloth and said, "There's a ranch up the mesa. Quiet place. Man who owns it don't speak much, but he eats." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "He's Apache." "That a problem?" Helen wiped her hands. "Not if he pays." The mesa rose like a sleeping animal in the distance, broad-backed, brushed with gold light. Helen walked toward it under the burn of late afternoon. No horse, no hat, just a woman who refused to stop moving. The trail wound upward in slow switchbacks, each bend revealing the wild stretch of the valley behind her and the narrowing path ahead. By the time she reached the gate, her breath was shallow, but her spine was straight. The ranch was a mix of old timber and newer nails. Smoke rose thinly from the chimney. Horses shifted in their corral, ears twitching at her presence. A raven called once from the barn eave, then fell silent. He came from behind the woodpile, shirtless and broad as the land he lived on. His skin was the color of earth after summer rain, and his hair was bound at the neck with a leather tie. He carried an axe loosely, as if it were no more weight than a walking stick. They stared at each other a long moment. Wind passed between them like it, too, was watching. She spoke first. "I don't talk much, mister, but I can cook." His eyes, dark and unreadable, rested on her face, then the skillet, then her hands. There was no smile, no nod, just a long, slow measure. Then he set the axe down and said, "You're hired." She followed him past the gate. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was something else. A truce. A beginning shaped like a question no one asked. Inside, the house was clean but quiet in a way that felt permanent. Wood creaked softly beneath her boots. There were no photographs, no lace, no signs of a woman. Just function. A heavy chair. A table with one place setting. A rifle above the hearth. And a hearth cold from neglect. She glanced at the stove. He didn't stop her. She opened her flour sack and started mixing what little she had. He brought in kindling without being asked. That night, they sat across from each other at the table. She ate little. He finished everything. Didn't thank her, but when he stood, he cleared the plate, set it gently in the wash basin. Before he stepped into the hallway, he looked over his shoulder once. Not at her face, at the stove. The room still smelled like cornbread and heat. She waited until his footsteps were gone, then slipped out to the porch. The moon hung low and yellow, casting long shadows across the fields. Somewhere, a coyote called. Helen pulled her shawl tight. For the first time in weeks, her hands weren't shaking. Behind her, the ranch house creaked and breathed. A home not yet hers, but one that hadn't said no. Far below in town, someone probably asked where she'd gone. But the wind had carried no answer. She didn't know if she'd stay. He hadn't said if she could. But he hadn't told her to leave either. And in that silence, something unspoken had begun, like bread rising before dawn. The skillet, still warm from supper, rested by the hearth. And she, tired, dust-streaked, and utterly alone, felt, for the first time in months, like maybe she was useful again. The kind of useful that keeps you from disappearing. The kind that a man doesn't say aloud, but notices when it's gone. The house didn't expect a woman again, not after the last one left in a storm and never returned. It held its breath in old timbers and dust-thick corners, watching Helen as if unsure whether to accept her weight. The rocking chair groaned when she sat in it, not in protest, but as if remembering. In the quiet mornings, she moved with care, sweeping the porch, mending a curtain torn and left dangling like a forgotten goodbye. Her fingers, though roughened by time and survival, knew the grace of routine. She didn't hum. She didn't chatter. She folded silence into her tasks like flour into dough. Canyon, he hadn't given her any other name, rose early, long before the sun reached the mesa's edge. He left without explanation and returned without apology, carrying firewood or game. He said little and expected nothing but supper hot and boots dry. And yet, in his silence, Helen found more room to breathe than in all the conversations she'd suffered in Dry River. She learned to read him through glances. When his shoulders sat high and tight, something was wrong with the fence line. When his footsteps dragged on the porch, he'd seen a memory on the trail and hadn't liked it. And when he paused beside the door at night and listened, just for a second, to the sounds of her cooking, she knew he was still deciding whether or not to trust her. The kitchen had no woman's touch, just shelves too high and pots left heavy from disuse. She reorganized nothing he'd placed, only added what was needed: clean cloths, fresh cornmeal, a jar of dried sage. Every change she made was quiet, reversible. She didn't ask. He didn't protest. One afternoon, she opened the barn loft and found a cradle, charred black at the corners, its wood warped and brittle. She touched it like it might still cry. There was no note, no cloth, no keepsake. Just silence steeped in ashes. She didn't speak of it. That night, she served stew without looking him in the eye. They didn't speak of the past, not yet. He didn't ask why she flinched when thunder cracked across the hills. She didn't ask why he never sat in the other chair by the fire. But he cut wood after supper, now extra logs she hadn't requested, and she mended his old shirts without waiting for thanks. The town, of course, noticed. Lydia May rode up one morning to drop off herbs, under the excuse of needing Canyon's opinion on a sick colt. She looked at Helen in that way women do when they know another woman's walked through fire. Heard Emmett still talkin'. Lydia said, eyes sharp beneath her bonnet. Said you got the Apache eaten out of your hand? Helen only nodded, her jaw set like stone. He can say what he wants. Reckon he will. Lydia handed her a small wrapped loaf. But it don't mean he's right. Later that night, Helen sliced the bread carefully, laid it beside the beans and meat. Canyon chewed slowly, deliberately. Halfway through the meal, he looked up. Town bothering you? She paused. No more than I deserve. He didn't argue. He didn't pity. He just kept eating. But the next morning, when she stepped outside to wash linens, she found a new plank on the porch where a rotten board had creaked. Hammered straight and sealed without a word. She began cooking more elaborately: pan biscuits, salted trout, roasted squash with herbs. He never asked for any of it. But he ate every bite. And once, she thought she saw the edge of something near a smile when she handed him coffee with extra molasses stirred in. One night, a storm rolled in, not thunder, but wind sharp enough to peel bark. She found him standing outside, watching the trees bend like penitents. "I ain't afraid of weather," she said, arms wrapped tight. He didn't look at her. "It's not the weather I watch." She waited, then quietly turned back inside. That same night, she woke to her own crying. It had burst out in her sleep, raw, gasping sobs she hadn't given herself permission to feel. When she opened her eyes, he stood in the doorway, holding a lantern. She wiped her face and sat up, trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. His voice came low, almost hoarse. "You're safe here." Then he turned, slow as dusk, and left the light burning in the hall behind him. The days after that changed subtly. She found her wash bucket already filled in the mornings. A thick quilt laid at the end of her bed one night without mention. And when she baked cornbread with wild honey, he left a small carved bird on the kitchen shelf the next morning. Its wings were spread mid-flight. Still, they said almost nothing. One evening, as she scrubbed out the skillet, she caught him watching her, not in a hungry way, but like a man remembering something good and long gone. She dried her hands on her apron and nodded toward the stove. "Do you ever want me to stop cooking?" He blinked. "No." A beat passed. "Then I won't." That was all. Later, as the fire in the hearth burned low, she sat in the rocking chair again. This time, the house creaked in a different rhythm. Like it had made space. Like it remembered a woman's breath and had decided not to resent it. And across the room, for the first time, he sat in the other chair. The one beside hers. No words. Just two chairs, one fire, and a house no longer afraid to feel full again. The earth softened with early spring, and in that loosening of soil, buried things began to stir, old griefs, half-healed wounds, and questions neither of them had dared ask. The mesa turned green at its edges, wildflowers testing the wind near the fence line. And still, they said little. Canyon rose early and returned later, lingering longer at the borders of the property. He watched for something, Helen could tell. Not animals. Not weather. Something older. A shadow of memory, or maybe the scent of danger. Whatever it was, it came with the quiet tension of a man listening to the past. She stayed close to the kitchen those days. Her hands kept moving, shelling peas, kneading dough, drying herbs. Stillness made her restless, and too much silence started to echo. At night, when he came back with saddle dust on his boots and smoke in his hair, she served him stew and tried not to ask why his eyes looked so far away. Then came the rider. Sheriff Boone Carver wasn't a man who wasted saddle time. He only climbed to the mesa when something needed fixing. He dismounted without knocking, hat in hand, and met Canyon at the fence post while Helen watched from the porch. "Didn't mean to trouble you," the sheriff said, voice low but firm. "But there's been talk in town. A fella passed through last week. Asked about a woman. Said his name was Bryce Claiborne." The name hit her like cold water poured down the spine. Carver didn't glance her way, but she knew he saw the stillness fall over her. Said she ran off with money that wasn't hers. Claimed he was setting things right. Canyon's jaw didn't move. His eyes didn't shift. He said, "Is he here now?" "No. Rode south. But he'll be back." Helen stepped off the porch then, slow and certain. She looked Carver in the eye. "I didn't take anything. The ranch wasn't his to claim." Carver gave a nod, quiet and unreadable. "Didn't say I believed him. Just letting you know the wind might change." He tipped his hat and rode off without waiting for a thank you. That night, the cornbread burned. Helen had lost track of time, of flame, of the weight she was trying not to feel. She scraped the skillet clean with trembling hands. When she turned, Canyon was there. She met his gaze with effort. "I didn't steal." "I didn't." "I know," he said. The two words cut through the air like rope sliced clean. Then he set something beside the sink. A hunting knife. Well balanced. Oiled. Silent. A gift, but not a pretty one. A gesture of protection. A recognition of danger. She swallowed hard, touched the handle, and nodded. Days passed with a quiet tension between them, taut as a pulled string. He carved fence posts with more focus than necessary. She scrubbed floors already clean. Neither asked when Bryce would arrive. They just prepared. Then one afternoon, while gathering mint by the creek, Helen found him sitting by the fire pit, whittling. She hesitated. He didn't look up. "My wife died 5 winters ago," he said. The words fell like stones into still water. "She went out to fetch help when the snow got bad. Cradle was still warm when I found her." Helen sat slowly on the ground nearby. Said nothing. Canyon kept carving, the blade whispering against the wood. "I buried them myself. Didn't let the town come." The fire beside them crackled once. She looked down at her palms. There was dirt beneath her nails and an old scar just above the thumb, faint, silver, shaped like the mouth of a scream. "My husband was a good man," she said. "Until his brother died. Then he drank. Then he hurt me. And when I left, the family said I was to blame for the drinking, too." The quiet between them shifted. Not cold now. Just deep. Canyon didn't reach for her. Didn't interrupt. Just listened. She pulled her shawl tight. "I didn't take anything. I just wanted to leave." He nodded once. They sat there until the light faded. Birds settled. Shadows stretched. Neither stood. Later that night, she found a wooden carving on her pillow, a hawk mid-flight, fierce and beautiful. The wings detailed, the beak sharp. Not a trinket. A sign. A symbol of survival. The next morning, Canyon washed his hands before breakfast. She saw it. Noticed how he checked his reflection in the water basin before sitting down. She stirred molasses into his coffee without asking. Set it down just right. And when he took the first sip, he gave a quiet sound of contentment. It wasn't thanks. But it was enough. The garden she'd planted was sprouting green, stubborn shoots breaking through. Every morning she touched each one, gently brushing away the dirt that dared hold them back. There were things you buried to forget, she thought. And things you buried so they could grow. Canyon had stopped sleeping with the rifle at his side. She'd noticed. And one night, she passed by his open door and saw the cradle from the loft, not burned, not discarded, but placed near the hearth. Cleaned. Whole again. He saw her see it. Their eyes met. No one spoke. The next day, she baked bread with dried apple and cinnamon. He cut extra wood without her asking. When she went to the barn, she found a new saddle blanket folded beside her tools. Soft wool. Apache patterns. No note. At supper, she said quietly, "You don't need to keep giving me things." "I'm not," he said. "I'm just not keeping them from you anymore." That night, for the first time, she dreamed without fear. In her sleep, there were no fists. No locked doors. No burning names. Only a garden that grew, and a hawk overhead, circling slow. Watching. Protecting. And when she woke, her hands were still. Outside, the mesa wind carried the scent of bread cooling on the windowsill. And somewhere beneath the house, old roots pressed deeper into the softened earth, searching not to escape, but to hold. The wind on the mesa carried many things, dust, pollen, the scent of pine from distant canyons, but it couldn't carry away a woman's past, and it couldn't silence a town's mouth. Helen stepped down from the wagon with a basket in one hand and her chin set like stone. She hadn't been to town in weeks, not since the sheriff came with Bryce Claiborne's name tucked in his coat pocket like a warning. But the garden needed seed, and the pantry needed lard, and a woman couldn't live forever behind someone else's silence. The town square buzzed like it always had, hammer on iron at the smithy, laughter leaking from the saloon, gossip tangled in porch rockers. She moved through it with her shoulders back, her skirt clean, her hair pulled into a braid that said nothing about shame and everything about survival. Inside the general store, Emmett Bishop leaned against the counter, talking to a ranch hand too young to know better. "Well, if it ain't the Apache's housemaid," he said, not looking at her, but loud enough. Helen placed her basket on the counter without flinching. Sack of flour. Bag of beans. 2 pounds of lard. Emmett raised an eyebrow, lazy and mean. Didn't think he needed payment in coin. Thought he took his dues nightly. The words landed like spurs against skin. The store quieted, tension thick in the rafters. She didn't answer. Not with words. But her fingers curled around the edge of the counter just enough to whiten at the knuckles. Behind her, someone coughed and looked away. Then the door opened. Canyon's boots echoed like thunder wrapped in leather. He crossed the threshold in 2 strides, taller than the shelves, broader than the air could hold. His presence didn't ask for silence, it commanded it. He walked past Helen, slow and deliberate, until he stood face to face with Emmett. The storekeeper swallowed. Canyon didn't shout. Didn't draw a weapon. He simply stared long, level, unblinking. Like a storm considering where to break. "You speak about her again," he said, voice low as a bass drum, "and I'll plant your teeth in your own grain sacks." Then he turned, took Helen's basket, and walked out. She followed, cheeks burning, not with shame, but something roar. Something close to awe. Outside, he didn't stop. Didn't speak. Only once they reached the wagon did he pause. Set the basket down. "You don't have to prove yourself to men like that." Her throat tightened. "I'm not trying to prove anything." He looked at her then. Really looked. "Good. 'Cause you don't have to." The ride back was quiet, save for the wheels rattling over dry ruts and the wind whistling its old songs. That evening, she baked bread and said nothing of the store. But she noticed the way he stood a little closer while she worked, as if ready to shield her from a world that had never been kind. A week later, Lydia May rode up with a satchel of lavender and mint, claiming her hens were sick and asking advice Canyon didn't actually give. She stayed for tea and watched Helen with that blend of curiosity and understanding older women carried like a second skin. "You keep your back straight," Lydia said, sipping slowly, even with the whole town trying to bend it. Helen smiled faintly. "It's just posture." "No," Lydia said, setting her cup down. "It's pride. And don't let that fool Emmett or the rest make you think it ain't worth carrying." They sat under the porch until the shadows lengthened. Before she left, Lydia handed her a small pouch. "You hang this above your door. Keeps bitterness away. Or at least reminds you that it don't belong inside." That night, Helen tucked the pouch near the lintel, fingers brushing it like a prayer. Later, she found Canyon in the barn, tightening a saddle strap. She hesitated at the door, then stepped in. "Do you care what they say?" she asked. He didn't look up. "No. Not even a little?" He paused. "Then, what they say don't change what I know." She watched him a long moment. "And what do you know?" "That you work hard. That you don't lie. That my house don't feel like a grave no more." Her breath caught. He kept his eyes on the leather. "That's enough for me." When she returned to the house, her hands shook so badly she dropped the flour tin. It spilled across the table like snow, soft and quiet. She didn't clean it right away. Just stood there, breathing through the tremble, until she felt steady again. Later, Canyon added another chair beside the fire. A small one, hand-carved, rough around the legs but built with care. It didn't match the others. She knew it wasn't meant for him. She sat in it anyway. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying scents of juniper and the far hills. But some things it couldn't carry away, like dignity returned, like names made good again. And from the mesa's edge, where the fence line met the long drop to the valley below, Helen could see the town shrinking into distance, small, mean, and far away. She had work to do. A supper to stir. A life to build. And no man with a slow mouth or bitter tongue, could take that from her again. The wind shifted just after dawn. It was the kind of shift a man like Canyon felt in his bones before the sky changed, a stillness behind the birdsong, a tension in the soil. He stood at the corral fence, arms folded, watching the sun rise slow and amber over the edge of the mesa. Something was coming. Not weather. Not wolves. Something meaner. Inside, Helen stirred embers back to life, humming softly under her breath. She didn't hum often, but today the kitchen felt warm, and her hands moved easy. She didn't know why, just that something felt suspended in the morning air, as if the world had inhaled and wasn't ready to exhale. By the time the rider appeared on the ridge, both of them had already stopped pretending the day would be ordinary. Bryce Claiborne rode like a man used to getting what he wanted, spurs sharp, coat stiff with money, eyes already angry before anyone said a word. The stallion beneath him was lathered with sweat, its mouth flecked from being reined too hard. He didn't dismount. He just sat tall in the saddle, his voice ringing out across the clearing like a challenge. "Well now, ain't this a picture? My brother's pretty little wife and the red man what took her in." Helen stepped outside, apron still on, flowers smudged on her sleeve. Her eyes didn't blink. Her mouth didn't shake. "You need to turn around," she said, voice level. "There's nothing for you here." Bryce laughed. "That ranch he left behind was never yours. He never signed a will. And the law knows blood before it knows virtue." Canyon moved without noise, stepping to Helen's side, but not in front of her. His presence spoke louder than any threat. Bryce shifted in the saddle, eyes narrowing. "Tell me, Apache," Bryce sneered, "you sleep in her bed, or do you just keep her for work?" Canyon didn't flinch. "You've said enough." Bryce reached for his coat, too fast, too sure, and drew iron. The sun caught the revolver just as Helen's breath caught in her chest. But Canyon was faster. He moved like fire, no wasted effort, no roar, just sudden heat and force. He knocked the revolver from Bryce's hand with a blow that echoed, then hauled him from the saddle like a sack of wheat. Dust rose as they hit the ground hard. Canyon didn't punch. He didn't shout. He just held Bryce down, one hand pressed against his chest, gaze steady. "You don't own her. You never did." Bryce snarled, face red, teeth bared. "She's nothing, just a..." Canyon struck then, once, clean, across the mouth. Not to punish. To silence. Helen stood still, hands clenched. She didn't look away. Behind them, a second horse approached. Sheriff Boone Carver, hat low, rifle slung but untouched. "Thought I might be needed," he muttered as he dismounted. Bryce turned to him, bleeding lip and all. "You gonna let this savage assault me?" Carver raised an eyebrow. "I saw a man reach for a gun on someone else's land." "That ain't assault. That's restraint." Bryce pushed himself upright. "She's a liar. A thief." "She's a woman who survived your family," Carver said. "And last I checked, that's not a crime." There was no trial. No shooting. No hanging. Just a man made small before a house he couldn't touch, a woman he couldn't humiliate, and a silence he couldn't command. Bryce rode away nursing more than a bruised lip. He didn't look back. No one watched him go. That evening, Helen didn't speak for a long time. She stood in the garden, fingertips brushing over the leaves of young squash. The sky had gone gold, then purple. Canyon walked out and joined her, boots soft on earth. "I didn't cry," she said. "You didn't need to." The wind moved through the trees like it carried an old hymn, something sung low and true. "I used to believe I had to earn safety," she whispered. "Prove I was worth keeping." He didn't answer with words. Instead, he placed something in her hand, small, round, and cool. A ring. Silver. Simple. Forged with care. Her breath caught. "I don't need promises," she said softly. Canyon met her eyes. "Neither do I. Just truth." They stood that way as twilight pressed close, hands together, the wind carrying away nothing but dust. That night, they didn't sit in silence. They spoke of things that mattered, what seeds to plant next season, what the winter might bring, what kind of porch she'd want if he built her one. Later, she laid her head against his chest, and he rested his hand over hers. Not ownership. Not salvation. Just presence. Just peace. The fire burned low in the hearth. Smoke curled up the chimney, carrying with it the last echoes of a name she no longer feared, a past no longer chained to her heels. Outside, the stars stretched over the mesa like watchful eyes. And inside, a house that once mourned now breathed again. There are things the wind can't carry away: dignity earned, trust built slow, and a woman's name spoken gently by a man who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. And sometimes, the fiercest kind of love doesn't shout or burn. It simply stays. Like rising smoke. Like steady firelight. Like the quiet, enduring strength of two souls who refuse to leave.